CapCut acting up. Look at the True I Speak podcast intro though I just worked on. They really trying to stop my greatness out here, y'all. It's like, no real shit. They really is trying to stop my greatness. But check it out.
We use the word cult a lot. Usually it conjures up images of compounds, charismatic leaders, matching outfits.
Dude, this sucks. But check it out here. So, this is for the podcast right here. We trying to do. Hold on. Oh, so we do got that in there. I'm tripping. So, alright. Yeah, but I ain't tripping on this, though. Because I'm trying to add this in right now. Look how they messing with my fucking stretch, y'all. When I try to stretch it, I look. And look, it ain't going to let me go back down. It's going to make it longer. When I try to go back down. Look, going down. It's going to make that go longer. They really out here hating, son. You know what I'm saying?
We use the word cult a lot. Usually it conjures up images of compounds, charismatic leaders, matching outfits, isolated communities off the grid. But lately there is this shift in how we talk about control. People are starting to look at their own families, their marriages, or their co-parenting situations, and they're using that exact same word, cult-like. And when you strip away the compound and the theology, what you are left with is a structural problem. A system of coercive control. Sophie, you have been looking at how these power dynamics operate not in remote communes, but in living rooms.
It is such a fascinating and honestly terrifying shift in how we understand abuse. Because for the longest time, our collective definition of domestic abuse was entirely physical. If there was no physical violence, the system and society at large basically said, well, it is just a bad relationship, work it out. But when people say cult-like in the context of a family or an intimate partner, they are pointing to a very specific, recognizable cluster of behaviors. It is coercive control. It is a repeated pattern of intimidation, degradation, monitoring, and reality distortion that gradually dismantle a person's independence. And we are finally at a point where the legal and statistical frameworks are catching up to what survivors have known for decades. In fact, if you look at the UK, they just marked a decade since the Serious Crime Act 2015 made coercive control a criminal offense. And the data we're seeing now in 2025 and 2026 is staggering. A recent report from the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research, covering late 2024 through the end of 2025, found that on average, a single coercive control incident involves 4 distinct controlling behaviors. 4 in one go. It is not just someone losing their temper, it is an architecture of imprisonment.
That architecture is what I want to dismantle today. Because if the average incident involves 4 different tactics, we are talking about a highly sophisticated strategy of suppression. Let's start with the foundation of that architecture. Isolation. It seems like the prerequisite for everything else.
It has to be. You cannot successfully distort someone's reality if they have a healthy chorus of outside voices telling them, no, that is not what happened, or that is not normal. So the controller has to cut the target off from their support network. But, and this is where the cult parallel is so sharp, it rarely starts with a blunt demand like, you cannot see your sister anymore. It is much more insidious. It is framed as protection or exceptionalism. Only we understand each other. Or your sister is always trying to undermine us. She is toxic. They frame outsiders as enemies to the relationship. And over time, the target pulls away from their friends and family voluntarily because the friction of maintaining those outside relationships becomes too exhausting. The New South Wales data from December 2025 actually highlighted that monitoring, tracking, and harassment were present in 56% of the coercive control incidents recorded by police. So they are not just isolating you emotionally, they are literally tracking your movements and communications to enforce that isolation.
It creates a closed loop of reality. If the only person validating your experience is the person controlling it, you are entirely dependent on them for your sense of what is real. But to build that dependency in the first place, they have to make you want to stay in the loop, which brings us to the reward-punishment cycle. Love bombing followed by withdrawal. Is that a conscious strategy, or is it just the natural rhythm of a volatile personality?
I think we get too hung up on whether the abuser is sitting in a dark room, twirling a mustache and planning it out. The intent matters less than the function. The function of love bombing, flooding someone with attention, promises, extreme support, declaring them soulmates instantly, is to create an intense emotional anchor. It sets the baseline. So when the punishment phase begins, the sudden withdrawal, the cruelty, the blame, the target does not think, this person is abusive. They think, what did I do to lose that amazing person from the beginning? How do I get them back? It creates what we call a trauma bond.
I keep getting stuck on the term love bombing, though, because it feels like it has been diluted. People use it on TikTok to describe someone who just texts too much after a first date. At what point does intense affection cross the line into a mechanism of abuse? I don't know. That feels too clean to me, this idea that affection is weaponized from day one.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because the dilution of the term is a real problem. It makes people roll their eyes when survivors use it. But the difference between someone who is just overeager and someone who is love bombing as a control tactic is what happens when you set a boundary. If someone texts you too much and you say, hey, I need a little space today, an overeager person might be embarrassed, but they will back off. A controller will punish you for it. They will switch instantly from, you are my entire world, to, you are ungrateful and selfish and you are ruining this. It's the alternation that makes it a trauma bond. It's intermittent reinforcement, which is the most addictive psychological mechanism we have. It's the slot machine effect. You keep pulling the lever, hoping for the jackpot of the good partner, but mostly you just get drained. And the National Domestic Violence Hotline explicitly warns that this alternating reward-punishment pattern is a foundational tool for keeping people stuck in confusion while the abuse escalates over time.
So the confusion is not a side effect. The confusion is the point. And that leads directly into gaslighting, the systemic denial of reality. That never happened. You are remembering it wrong. You are crazy. Over time, the target stops trusting their own memory.
Exactly. And gaslighting is so deeply destructive because it attacks the core of your cognitive functioning. If you cannot trust your own perception of reality, you cannot advocate for yourself. You cannot leave. You see this vividly in family dynamics, where the abuser twists the narrative so successfully that the target ends up apologizing for the abuse they just endured. It is not just lying. It is rewriting history in real time. And when there is no formal diagnosis involved, this pattern is widely recognized across psychological literature as a severe form of psychological abuse. In fact, in the UK's recent 2025 special issue of the British Psychological Society on coercive control, they emphasize that these behaviors are essentially about the construction and deconstruction of identity. They dismantle who you are until you are just an extension of their need.
And the dismantling accelerates when they bring other people into it. The mob behavior. This is where the cult comparison really locks in for me. It is not just a two-person dynamic anymore. The dominant person recruits relatives, friends, flying monkeys, whatever you want to call them, into the narrative. Coordinated blame, image management.
That is the group enforcement mechanism, and there is something almost sad about how effectively it works. The controller will preemptively manage their image by going to family members or the community and saying, I'm so worried about her, she's unstable, she's acting erratic. So when the target finally breaks down and tries to ask for help, the community has already been primed to see them as the problem. Everyone starts repeating the same script. And for the target, that is the ultimate isolation. You finally reach out, and the person you reach out to says, well, he told me you might say something like this because you're struggling. It's a total closed system. And abuse frameworks show that relying on this kind of social pressure is a classic coercive strategy. It reinforces the control because the target realizes, even if I leave him, I have to fight everyone else to prove I'm sane, which creates the perfect conditions for provocation and baiting. Push the target's buttons, wait for them to snap, and then point to their reaction as evidence that they are the unstable one. Yes, reactive abuse. Though a lot of experts prefer the term violent resistance or simply a normal reaction to an abnormal amount of stress. They will poke and prod, maybe whisper something cruel just out of earshot of others. A survivor from a 2025 UK prostitution actually described exactly that, saying her abuser would do things out of earshot to make her seem unhinged. And then when you finally scream, they hold up their hands and say, "Look how crazy you are. Look how you are treating me." It is incredibly dangerous, especially in co-parenting or family court disputes.
Wait, does that actually hold? Because when I hear that, a skeptical part of me wonders if we are just rebranding toxic mutual conflict. If two people are screaming at each other, isn't it sometimes just a fundamentally broken dynamic rather than a deliberate, asymmetrical trap?
That is exactly what family courts often get wrong, and it is a fatal misunderstanding. Mutual conflict requires relatively equal power. In mutual conflict, both parties might behave terribly, but neither is systematically stripping the other of their autonomy, their finances, or their grip on reality. Baiting in a coercive control dynamic is asymmetrical. The abuser is calm while they are provoking. They are in control. The reaction they elicit is entirely for the purpose of discrediting the victim. It is data collection. They are gathering proof of the victim's instability to use later. And we know from abuse resources that escalation is incredibly common when the target tries to resist this. When you look at post-separation dynamics, this is exactly what happens. The abuser uses the court system as a new arena for the exact same control.
Right, the children become the new leverage. If they cannot control you directly anymore because you left the house, they control you through the kids. Relay messages, test loyalty, create guilt. The child welfare implications here are massive.
They really are. The literature on post-separation abuse connects these tactics directly to severe harm. Children are used as pawns to pressure the protective parent. They are forced to witness destabilizing conflict, which CDC and child welfare materials explicitly warn harms their emotional well-being and development. But it goes even further than that. A 2025 paper published in the Journal of Social Welfare and Family Law detailed how abusive fathers exploit the family court systems to maintain coercive control. They use endless litigation, economic abuse, and this is critical, false claims of parental alienation to continue their dominance. The court prioritizes shared parenting and misinterprets a mother's protective actions as implacable hostility. So the abuser essentially gets the state to enforce his control.
The state becomes the flying monkey. The legal system itself is weaponized. That is a structural failure of massive proportions. You are trying to escape a closed system of abuse, and you run directly into a family court system that does not recognize the abuse because there are no physical bruises.
Exactly. And this is why there is such an urgent push for systemic reform right now. Survivors are being discredited and financially destroyed by repeated court applications. In the UK, a 2025 submission by the Stamping Out Post-Separation Abuse Collaboration highlighted that survivors are routinely re-traumatized and economically drained by abusers who use contact orders to maintain control. It is legal abuse. It is custody stalking, and the toll on a target is devastating. You spend massive amounts of energy trying to prove what happened, walking on eggshells, over-explaining yourself to judges and social workers who lack the training to see the pattern. It creates this deep emotional fog.
Which brings us to how you actually survive this. The advice is always to shift from arguing about motives to documenting patterns. keep a log, dates, times, exact words, screenshots. But I look at that and think, doesn't that make you feel insane? You are already doubting your reality, and now you have to become an archivist of your own abuse? It feels like it would just pull you deeper into the paranoia.
I hear what you are saying, and initially, yes, it feels incredibly clinical and strange to screenshot a seemingly mundane text message from your co-parent. But actually, documentation is the antidote to the gaslighting. It is the tether to reality. When you are in the emotional fog and they say, "I never said that," you can look at your log and see, actually, on Tuesday at 4 p.m., you did. The hotline specifically recommends building this case precisely because memory becomes so fragmented under extreme stress. It is not paranoia, it is preservation. And it matters legally too. The UK just passed the Victims and Prisoners Act 2024, which came into effect in February 2025, and it places offenders sentenced to 12 months or more for coercive control under strict multi-agency public protection arrangements, or MAPA. This is the same system used for violent and sexual offenders. To get there, to get that level of protection, you need the documentation, you need the pattern. You cannot just argue feelings in court. You have to show the architecture.
So practically, the rules are tight. Do not argue long by text. Keep communication brief, factual, child-focused. Assume escalation is possible if you challenge the control. And the filter you mentioned earlier, I think that is the most clarifying piece of this whole conversation.
Yes, when you are drowning in the confusion, you just ask yourself one question. Is this behavior increasing truth, safety, and stability for me and the children? Or is it increasing confusion, fear, dependency, and control? It cuts through all the noise. It doesn't matter what their excuse is or what kind of childhood trauma they have. If the result of their action is that you feel more confused, more fearful, and more dependent on them, that is control. And knowing that allows you to stop trying to explain your inner world to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you.
It pulls you out of the debate and back to the reality of the dynamic. This isn't just a bad relationship, it is a system. And once you see the system, you can start charting a way out. If you are listening to this and recognizing these patterns, the isolation, the reality distortion, the endless litigation, know that you are not imagining the structure of it. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 for support and safety planning. Share this with someone who might be in the fog right now. Sometimes just having the vocabulary is the first step out.